Hi, everyone. Good evening. So it's Susan again, and I am happy to be your host this evening once again. Lovely to see all of you. It's exciting to see everyone join again on another Thursday evening with us. Could I ask you to just raise your hand if this is your first time joining the series? Wow. Okay, so quite a few of you, this is your first time. All right, so welcome. Welcome to our second session of Bridge the Gap, a series of webinars that have been curated to help you overcome some of today's pressing challenges to become better leaders. Now, before we go any further, I would like to have a shout out to the American Center Colombo. And you might be aware the American Center is a branch of the US Embassy, and they work towards promoting and empowering the young people of Sri Lanka by giving them necessary skills. So they have many programs like this. And I would like to invite you, I think there was a poll that was going on just a few minutes back, and you can follow them on Facebook as well as Instagram to find out about the programs that they have. They have many lovely programs, language training, entrepreneurship, things like that, right? So follow them on Facebook and also Instagram. You will see the link in the chat box in a little while. So yeah, do follow them. And also this program is brought to you with the American Center is Headway Learning Solutions. It's an institute that has been in the business of corporate training, English language training and testing. They've been around for more than 20 years, and one of their, okay, I think I hear some of you saying that there's a bit of lagging. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Could you just say yes in the chat box if you can hear me? Yeah? All right. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so like I said, Headway has been around for more than 20 years, doing a lot of, working with a lot of private and governmental organizations with regards to English language training and testing. And both of these institutes have come together to bring you Bridge the Gap, which is a series of webinars like I told you. And today we are going to be looking at a very special thing, I think a skill that all of us require, and that is presentation. I am happy to welcome a very good friend of mine and also a person who has been working with a lot of institutes and people of different business areas, different industries, to help them communicate better for over 15 years now. For the last 15 years, she has been helping them with training, writing, and emceeing. And she also has studied, she has a background in marketing as well as teaching English, but she firmly believes that you can never really learn everything, right? You can never know enough. So she is right now working at improving those qualifications. So without further ado, let me welcome Miss Sharon Stephen. Hi, Sharon. Nice to see you after quite some time.
Hi, Susan.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So over to you, Sharon. I'm sure we're going to have a fun session today with presentation skills, a skill that all of us require at some point in life, isn't it? So
yes, definitely.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you too well there.
Okay, can you hear me now? I might have to hold up my mic this way.
All right. Okay. Can hear you now, Sharon. Okay. So over to you. looks like we have a little bit of a technical issue over there. Give me a second. Hold on.
So I think things got rather interesting because my technology failed me. But Susan, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. If you let me switch my video on, that will be great.
Give me a second. Hold on.
And if you could do me the very big favor of sharing my slides for me, I would really appreciate it. All right, so we are back in business. Okay, thank you so much. So as Susan has displayed on screen, please do go to menti.com, use the code, that's 83292213. So when you go to menti.com, it'll ask you for a code. Go ahead and use that code to get into it, and it'll ask you what you feel about presentation. You have the chance to enter about 3 words. So please do that for me because it will help me see what you think when you hear the word presentations. Are you scared? Does it make you feel excited? Tell us all about it on Menti, and we'll make a pretty cool word cloud out of it, which we'll come back to in a second, right? But at the moment, just go enter it and we'll come back to that when we get started. Thank you, Tara. You can see in the chat, there is a link. You can use that instead if it's too much work to go typing in menti.com and the code. Please go ahead and use the link as well. All right, Susan, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as Susan said, I'm Sharon Stephen. I'm also called Dinarsha sometimes. I'm doing this for Headway Learning Solutions, and we're going to talk about presentation skills. Now, presentation skills is something that, as Susan said, we use quite a lot. But the funny thing is, we sometimes don't realize how much we're using them. Because if you really think about it, right? If I ask you, when was the last time you made a presentation? You're probably going to think back to work, to school. If you can answer me in the chat, that would be amazing. I'm actually going to invite you all to interact as much as you can in the chat, because I'm not used to just talking to myself. And I know this is a webinar format, but I would really like to hear from you guys as well. So please go ahead, tell me in the chat what you're thinking, what you're feeling. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat as well, and we'll take them up a little later on. Okay, so, oh, you never did a presentation. That's very interesting. So I see that in the chat, right? And I saw someone who did a presentation when they were teaching, someone did one last week and one last month, 6 months before. We're getting such a variety of answers. Now, would you believe me if I said, well, you probably made a presentation yesterday or even today, because we're in the evening now. It sounds a bit odd, but when you think about it, how many people do you need to have in your audience for it to be a presentation? Really, you need just one other person, right? But it can take a few different forms. Now, when you're talking about presentations, it doesn't necessarily have to be just about a formal presentation with PowerPoint and visuals and all of that. That is one form of presentation. Can you think of any other forms of presentation you might have done? So let's look in the chat, see if anyone has. Yes, exactly. When you're speaking, And if you're speaking to one person or many people, that is still a form of presentation. All right, tour guiding, brilliant. Thank you, Dilan. So this is getting very interesting because we've got such a variety of experience here. So yeah, teaching, thank you. So when we're going to get into that a little bit and talk a little bit more about that, right? Um, so while you're telling us your feelings about presentations, and we'll look at that later, KPI reviews. Okay, this is really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all the kinds of presentations you've done, right? Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a little look at presentations today. And as you keep sharing, we'll learn a little bit more about what we're going to be talking about. But what I want you to think about right now, okay, is a very strange question. You might be wondering, why on earth am I asking you this question? And you'll see it on the next slide. So if you were here for the last presentation, not just this one, okay, yeah, thank you. You would have heard Naren tell you, if you teach a man to fish, then they can fish for a lifetime. So my question for you is, have you ever been fishing? I'll explain why we're having this conversation a little later, but have you ever been fishing? Let me know in the chat if you have. Everyone's gone quiet because you're completely puzzled about why I'm asking you about fishing. Well, you know what? If you haven't, don't worry about it. Because thank you, Prabhat and Sanjeeva. No, of course not. I haven't ever caught an actual fish either. I like my fish caught, cleaned, and sometimes even cooked by someone else, right? But funnily enough, I go fishing quite often, just not for actual fish. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. Oh, I saw someone who has experience going fishing, so you might be able to relate to this. But in the meantime, before I explain what kind of fishing I've got doing, tell me in the chat, what's the first thing you would do if you were going on a fishing trip? So say you want to go on a fishing trip, what's the first thing you'll do? I like that, Rafahat. You've gone fishing and never caught a fish. Okay, so you're thinking about going with a friend. Okay, you get your stuff ready. Brilliant. You wear your safe suit. Okay, a little before you wear the safe suit and buy the fishing rod and grab the equipment, what are you going to do? So I'm getting some really interesting answers here. Okay, you're searching for tools and the food for fish. You're thinking about the climate. You're thinking about the fish you're going to catch. Okay, brilliant. I'm so glad you guys are in on this. We start planning it, right? You think about where you're going to go. You think about what kind of fish you want to catch. Like someone said, what prey you want. What's the best way to catch those fish? Right? Is it a net? Is it a fishing rod? Are you going to try out stilt fishing? Well, you have to figure all of that out. So you probably start thinking about those things. Before you go and get the equipment, you're going to think about it. Because if you decide, okay, I'm going to fish using a net, and you haven't thought about it, but you just go and buy a fishing rod, that's not going to work out for you, right? So you have to sit and think and plan. Okay, so now you've got it all planned out. You're going to go to Negombo or wherever you feel is a good spot, once lockdowns are lifted, of course. And you've decided, okay, you're going to go deep sea fishing or whatever type of fishing works for you. So what do you do next? Let's see. Exactly, Fatima. You have to make a plan before you go fishing. Now, Susan, if you can show us the next slide, we can take a look at the whole plan that we've mapped out for today, right? So we started off by planning our fishing trip. Now, what comes next? Yes, exactly. You get your stuff together. I like that. You scroll YouTube to see what happens next. So if you hold on there for a second. So next step is to go prepare, right? This is where you start getting your things together. You get your life jackets. You make sure you maybe You have your food and water, because what happens if you don't catch fish at all, right? So, you have to be ready for that. You get a friend to help you, maybe you hire a boat, you organize your transport. So that's all in the preparation stage. Okay, fine, you've got everything ready. What do you do next? You've got to make sure that you know how to use all that fancy equipment, right? Now that you're prepared, you have to figure out, okay, how do I use all of this? So if we look at the next step, we'll see that, okay, you have to make sure that you've got used to your fishing rod or the net, or you know your way around the boat, or like have your, even if you don't know how to swim, at least you have the life jacket and you know how to use it. So you don't want to be fish food instead of getting fish for food, right? So you practice and you get used to the equipment and you get familiar with it. Then after that, of course, you go straight ahead and you go and get into the boat and you go off for your fishing trip. But even when you go on your fishing trip, right, there are a few things you have to do on the day itself to make sure you actually catch those fish. Now, I have a feeling that some of you are going, hold on, I'm pretty sure I signed up for presentation skills. What's all this about fishing? So remember I told you at the start, I go fishing quite often, but not really for fish. So it wasn't a riddle, but the fishing I do is for people's attention. And to do that, I have to go through the same steps that we just talked about. So we're going to talk about how you can hook some of those fish too. Now, I'd really like to see some of those things, how you felt about presentations. If you can share in the chat, what were some of your feelings when you hear about presentations? I saw some of you said you were very nervous. You start shaking, your voice gets high, all of that. So we're going to see how we can deal with all of that, right? Now, for us to do that, we're going to follow the same route that we did with our fishing trip. We're going to start off with planning things. Then we're going to prepare things. Oh, I love what you said, getting people engaged. We'll talk about that as well. So first we plan our presentation. So we are going to think about our presentation. What are the elements that go into it? And we'll talk about that in more detail. Then we're going to prepare. So we're going to get the material together. What's the stuff we need for our presentation? Then we get used to the equipment. So here's where it gets interesting, right? Because we start thinking that the equipment is only the presentation or, Zoom or the PowerPoint or Prezi or whatever it is you're using, but it isn't. Your body, your voice, all of that is part of the equipment you have when you're making a presentation. So we've got to get used to that. And this is something you can do as many times as you like. In fact, all these steps, even though we seem to be taking a linear approach and going from plan to prepare to practice to perform, all of these steps are things that we can do in cycles and repeat it over and over and over again until we feel comfortable. Okay, so perform is ideally the final step where, okay, I'm comfortable with everything. Now I'm going out to go get people hooked and to fish for their attention. So let's see how we get to that stage. We start with the planning, of course, as we decided with the fishing. So there are a few steps that we need to think about, right? Thank you, Susan. If we can switch to the next slide, we can take a look at that staircase. Now, if you look at the steps there, and you look at the first letters on each of those words, what does it spell out? I know you can read it, so just take a look at it. You can see that it spells out the word care if you go from one. Thank you so much, Sharon. Exactly. So this is because we care about what we're talking about. right? And so we want other people to care too. So we start by connecting with those people. How are we going to connect with people? What do you think? If you wanted to connect with someone, what would you do? So I'm going to give you a minute to tell me in the chat. If you cared about someone, say it was your friend you were talking to. Okay, you'd call them. That's interesting. Why would you call and text them? What are you trying to do? You're chatting with them. Okay, great. You're reaching out. Okay, there's a really interesting point in the chat, is knowing the entry point. Aha, how do you know the entry point? I've seen another one in the chat. It's ask questions, find common interests. You guys are fabulous, okay? Because that is exactly how you connect with someone. So when you're thinking about your audience, there are a couple of questions that you might want to ask yourself. So let's take a look at the next slide and it'll tell us some of the questions, but you guys have really started thinking about it, okay? So what are their interests? Oh, I love that, Achira. I'll come back to that in telling a story. So what are their interests? What language do they speak? This is important, right? If they're not too familiar with whatever language you're speaking, can you speak the other language that they are comfortable with? Or can you simplify your language? The place where you're talking to them is important. Are you talking to them in a big auditorium? Are you talking to them on a Zoom call like this? Are you talking to them one-on-one? It all makes a difference, right? How big is your audience? Is it just one person? Say, for example, now I told you presentations could take several forms, right? When you were a kid, did you ever try to convince your parents to let you go stay over at your friend's place? Maybe you did. And that in itself involved you kind of getting their attention, going Ammi or Tati or mom or dad, whatever you call them, and saying, well, you know what? This friend of mine is a really good person. You can totally trust us to behave ourselves and, have a really nice time there and, not get into any trouble at all. And to make more of the point, you might even try to look at it from the other person's point of view. This is still a one-on-one presentation because you're giving them facts in order to accomplish something, right? So the size of your audience matters, but the basis of this presentation is the same, whether it's one person or 5,000 people, right? You're doing it, you have the same basis. You're trying to convince people either by informing them, by entertaining them, or, getting their opinion, getting them involved. You're still trying to convince them either to do something, not to do something, or maybe, take some kind of action. And we'll talk about that as well, how you're going to convince them to take action in a little while. But the starting point of all of this is understanding them, or knowing exactly what they like, what their interests are, and that can vary with all these factors. Like say their age. Why do you think it'll be different with an older person? So if you're talking to your grandparents, what do you think? What do you think the difference is between talking to your grandparents and talking to your friend, or talking to your boss and talking to your friend? Is there a difference in the way you'll do it? Probably, right? Now, here's an interesting question in the chat, which is more effective? Is it when we use the language we know, or is it when we try to talk in a language which the audience understands, whether we're confident or not so confident in that language? There's always a balance, because what happens is when you are not confident in a particular language, you're probably not going to get your point across as well. But if that is all your audience understands, you have to think about, okay, can I do this? Can I get some help from someone else to equip me for this? Or should I just, pass on this opportunity and let someone who is better equipped to do it? I'm not saying don't ever try, because like I said, there's a balance. Sometimes you can know enough to communicate your idea effectively. Sometimes you can know too much. So like I just saw a comment saying, okay, our grandparents don't understand technical terms, but we're so used to using technical words, right? We use it all the time. It's kind of something that you're familiar with. So when you go into that discussion, are you going to use all the technical jargon? Are you going to use all the acronyms and, you know, the lead speak, the tech speak when you're talking with your parents? Probably not. With your grandparents, sorry, probably not. Because you'll want to simplify it for them. You'll want to make it easier to understand. So this is why thinking about your audience helps you connect. Now, I also saw a point in the chat which talked about stories. Storytelling is an amazing, amazing way to connect with your audience, right? Because we are built on stories from like ancient times. We've been telling each other stories around the fireplace. This is how we passed on knowledge. So human brains are pretty much wired to have, you know, to listen to stories, pay attention, and gain knowledge from them. So connecting with your audience, if you share a story about yourself or a story about, you know, something they can relate to, that's a brilliant way to make that connection. Also, there are three main ways, like when you think about literature, right? There are three big ways that you can connect. One is through sharing information or like logical arguments, right? That's a good way to convince people. But there are a couple of other ways also. Now, logical arguments are the one we most often default to in a presentation, but it's not the only way. We can also talk about emotion. I have a friend who like was really good at debating because she could make people feel the emotions she was feeling, right? And so that actually helped her in getting her argument across. Because when you're touched, you're much more likely to listen to what someone was saying and open your mind to it. The other way is talking about right or wrong, right? That's another way of getting information. That can be very, very subjective though, so be careful when you're using it because you can alienate people who don't agree with you. In any case, all of these combined can help you kind of build a story around your topic. Like we were talking about fishing. Now, this is how you kind of get the hook in. You're baiting the hook because you have to understand what kind of fish you are trying to catch. If you try to feed a fish the kind of food that it doesn't like, however much you wait patiently sitting and wiggling your hook about in the water, nothing's going to happen. Just like that with your audience, if you are using an argument or a topic that they're not really interested in, you're not going to get as much results. So make sure you know your audience. You've done a little bit of research. There are always ways to find out a little bit more. You can send a survey out before, you can ask the organizers, and they'll be able to help you out with who's coming or a general picture of who's coming to your audience and to your presentation, right? So that's step one, knowing the audience, telling them stories. And then you have to think about yourself as well. What is it you bring to the table? What do you have in common with your audience? And a few other things to think about. What medium are you using? Is it Zoom? Is it an in-person session? Are you going to be able to share slides? keep things moving, because I could talk about all of this for ages, because it's a very involved area. But let's take a look at what we need to figure out next in a staircase of caring, right? The next thing we need to think about is, what is our aim? And I'd say, if you go away from this conversation that we're having with just one thing, this is the most important one to figure out. Susan, if you could show the next slide, that would be great, please. Right? Yes. All the questions in there, it's a big why. Why are you doing this? What do you want your audience to go away and do? Now, that could be that you want them to actually learn something, but you also want them to act on that learning, right? Just knowing something isn't enough. You'd want them to think about it at the very least. But most of the time, we actually want them to do something. Like if we're doing a product pitch, we want them to buy a product. If we are talking to our manager about how good a job we've been doing, we might want them to give us a raise or promotion. If we're talking to, as in my first example, we're talking to our parents about going to a friend's place, we want them at the end of whatever we've been saying to say, okay, I trust you, go have fun at your friend's place, right? So you need to think about your why. So even if you forget all of the rest of this presentation, I hope you don't forget this part. Remember your why. That is like the most important thing, because it'll help keep you on track. Now, when you have a why, you might have a really broad topic, right? Someone might say, okay, I want you to come and talk about cats. So you're going, what about cats? Right? And you need to think about that a little bit, because you need to think about your audience and say, okay, what would they want to know about cats? You also need to think about, what do I know about cats? And what matters about cats? So I think Susan has something to say as well. If I
Yeah,
could,
Sharon. I know you told them that, this is the point to remember, but I like to remind them that end of this session, Sharon, we're going to be asking them a few questions. So nope, this is not the only thing to remember. I would like to invite you to please take down notes during the session, because at the end, like last time, we had a lot of them asking us about certification and things like that. So we have arranged for that. At the end of the session, there'll be a few questions that we'll be asking them, that they will need to answer and submit to us, provided they are here for 7 webinars. They will receive a certificate at the end of the program, Sharon. So yes, with regards to the presentation, if you walk out with only this in your mind, Sharon has done her job. But if you want to have a certificate at the end, I would like to ask you to please pay attention, because we will be having questions at the end, people. Yeah, Sharon, sorry for butting in. Let me hand it back over to you.
No problem, Susan. I think that will actually help them remember a little bit more than their why. But
yeah, motivation there for you.
But as I was saying, this is one of the most important things about this presentation. And when I was making this presentation, I thought about my why. And what I realized is that I wanted you to go away feeling that you could plan your presentation, which is why this is going to be very heavy on the planning phase. Because once you got your plan down, you find that it's much, much easier to deliver. We'll talk about delivery as well, but this is why we're talking so much about, okay, getting all the parts together. Because when you go on your fishing trip, you want to get the right equipment, right? So let's go back to the whys and think about. So I was on cats before Susan jumped in, just like a cat would do. So I was saying, please, when you get a broad topic like cats, how to narrow it down? You think about your audience's interest, you think about what you bring to the table, you think about what you care about, okay? So depending on the person, one person might say, oh, that's a real pain in the neck. And the presentation might be all about, why you shouldn't keep a cat. But on the other hand, another person might say, oh, cats are awesome. That's why people, used to treat them as gods in ancient times. So you take a broad topic and you think about that mesh of interest between you and your audience, and you find that balance again. So you narrow it down by looking for an angle. Now, the thing about presentations is however much you talk to people, right? After a week, how much do you think they're going to remember of what you've said? You can be as convincing as you like and all of that, but our brain doesn't hold on to all the information forever. So how much do you think they'll remember? Go ahead, put it in the chat. Let's have a vote, an auction. 20%. Okay, Natasha, starting the bidding. Who else would like to weigh in? 25%. Okay. Someone said 10%. Okay. Any other options? 47%. Andre, you're so optimistic. There's another 10%. There's 20%, 30%. One said 50%. Oh my goodness. You guys are really, really optimistic. After a week, I hate to say this, but research has showed that you will only remember 10%. Okay. And that is why knowing why you're speaking will allow you to remind people. Now, that's my next step. So if we can look at the next slide, we'll see a few ways that we can remind people. On the left-hand side, you'll see 3 ways, and trust me, there are more, you can Google them, but these are 3 good ways of making things memorable. And on the right-hand side, you'll see 3 things that you can do. Okay, so if you look at the rule of 3, this is a technique that's used in literature, where if you look at the Olympic logo, if you look at most slogans, you have, for Olympics, you have swifter, higher, stronger. Susan, I hope I'm right. Faster, higher, stronger. And you have things that are paired in 3s, like I came, I saw, I conquered. Many of the memorable statements you'll find are paired in 3s because that's just sticky for her brain, right? And it hooks in and keeps it there. You can use mnemonics, which are just devices, like techniques. Maybe a rhyme, maybe a song, maybe associating something with a color. Live, laugh, love. Thank you so much for that. Yes, exactly. Now, mnemonics are like Every Good Boy Deserves Fun. That was when I was learning music ages ago, right? Those are the notes on the treble clef. And that actually helps you remember. I think I learned this when I was, 10, and it stuck with me. So you can imagine, when you think of the colors of the rainbow, there was one that we used, Roy G. Biv. That never really worked for me, but that's one way of doing it. We used to use things to remember the elements in the periodic table. So incorporating those into your presentations makes it more memorable. It makes it easier for people to stick with it. Now, another thing that you can do is use an acronym like CARE. Okay. If at the end of this presentation, I ask you what CARE stands for, hopefully you'll have some memory of, connect, aim, remind, and encourage. Because we've combined it into CARE, then, okay, your brain's made that association. You can make other associations as well to make it easier for people to remember. But one of the really good ways to help people remember is to repeat things. Now, you have to be a little careful with this, because if you keep repeating things over and over and over again, people are going to get really tired of listening to you. So repeat things at strategic points. You'll find that a little later in our presentation, I'm going to mention CARE to you again. But repeating is not the only thing you can do. You can ask people questions. Because when we're involved, when we're engaged, we remember things better. And of course, you can get people to do things, right? And that actually having practice makes them much, much more likely to remember things. So hopefully you can nudge that 10% up before by using some of these techniques. Now, storytelling is also a great way. Thank you for that comment in the chat. And what you can do to incorporate storytelling is you can start with a story, or you can weave a story through your presentation. So you'll find that, from time to time, I refer to that fishing trip in our conversation today. And that weaves the story of us going on a trip together into this presentation. You can do that too. So have a theme, think about, okay, how is this going to tie in with all the different elements of my presentation, and talk people through that story. Okay, getting emotion into presentations, especially business presentations, may seem like a really difficult thing. But what you really need to do that is to look at the human connection. Okay, what is it that your audience is interested in? What will make them feel something? What about this topic is actually moving? Say, for example, if you talk about global warming, you can end up like telling everybody all the facts in the world about global warming. You can say, the glaciers are melting, temperature has gone up by this percentage over the last few years, but that won't impact people as much as if you say animals are losing their homes because of this, people are losing their homes. There are floods and climate change is happening. People are unable to live in places that they've lived in for decades because of forest fires. So my tip for storytelling is always look for the human connection, and then you'll be able to get people's attention and bring that emotion in as well. And like you said, it will make things much more sticky in their memory. The next step is to go into encouraging them. So you've given them all the information, right? But say you go to your parents, again, I'm bringing up this staying over at a friend's place example. You go to your parents, you say, okay, my friend is a really good person. You've met them. We've never gotten into trouble. We're going to study together. You've given them all the facts. But if you don't actually ask the question, and if you don't actually say, okay, I want to go stay over, my parents are just going to be like, okay, that's great person, great friend. But they're not going to say, okay, you can go stay over, because you haven't asked the question. So the final step is to encourage. This is in your planning. So you're thinking about how to go about this. Then final step in your presentation is to encourage people. So if we can look at the next slide, you'll see that big red button that says act now. You have to give people that push at the end of it. And in marketing language, this is called a call to action. And it really pushes people to take the next step. So you might say, my product is 20% off, buy it now before things change. Or you might say, you know what, electronics prices are going up next week. Make sure that you get your fridges now, or apply now, exactly. Yes, Karthika. So the interesting thing is limited seats available by itself is not really a call to action. But the apply now attached to it, then you're telling them what to do. So they're looking around and you're just giving them a little nudge in the direction that you want. If you think you've never used a call to action before, think again. Like when you meet someone you really like, or you're hanging out with your friends and then you leave and they're like, and you're like, miss me. That's a call to action. Okay, so we use it a lot in real life. Remember to use it in your presentations. Now, I'm going to get you involved again in the next step because I need your help to figure out what's wrong with the slides that we're going to see. So we finished our planning phase. We're jumping into the prepare phase. So this is an easy one, okay? Because part of it is getting the material ready. And so now you've gotten your planning done, you're going to make the material. Most often you use PowerPoint slides as a visual aid. So let's talk about that. So if you could go back to the next slide, please. I saw you had jumped to it, but it looks like you've gone back. Okay, fine, perfect. Take a look at this, you guys, and tell me in the chat, what is wrong with this slide? Aha, I see. Thank you, Teja. Too long. It's unclear. Why is it unclear? I mean, it's got so much information in it. It tells you all you could possibly want to know about time management. Aha, the length. Okay, too much information. Yes, you get a little bit overloaded looking at this, right? Because the main intention of a visual aid is that aid. It's supposed to help you. It's not supposed to have all the information. Very often when we're making a presentation, we get tempted to put every single thing that we know into a presentation. But if we do that, for one thing, there's really no use of us. We could just do it in a document and we could hand it over and people could spend their time much more profitably just reading it. The other thing that some people do is they go ahead and then after putting a really bulky slide in like this, they read it word for word for word. How would you feel if I sat and read every word on that slide to you? Not great, right? You'll be like, hey, I can read. They taught me that in school. And so when we're doing it, we avoid it. Now, there was a really interesting point as well in the chat, which was that there's too much content. Yes, because remember your why? You want to know exactly what points you want to make, right? If there's too much content, the person's brain can't hold on to it. It's like you're getting normally if you give someone some rice, you give them a spoonful, like if you're feeding them rice, right? This is like taking a huge ball of rice and just stuffing it in their face. And they don't know what to do with it. I like that you also mentioned visuals because our next slide is going to be about visuals. Visuals are great, but what happens if you have a slide like this? You said, oh, it's not color. The last one was not colorful. This one's colorful. So what's wrong with this one? Okay, it's too flashy. Thank you for that. What else is wrong with it? You don't know where to look. Nice. Yes, it takes away from the point. It's unorganized. There are too many pictures. So just like no pictures is a bad thing, too many pictures can also be a bad thing, right? It's not organized. Perfect. So we've established a few things out of this that we kind of need to think about the main points. We need to organize the points and we need to include visuals that are relevant and are helpful. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. I think that's the last, one of the last examples I have for you. Now, this is something I've seen in so many business presentations, right? I'm sure you have as well. There's nothing wrong with including tables. Having tables is great. It can convey information. But having this table, what's wrong with it? It's colorful. Oh, someone said this is fine. Okay, there's then the other person said the too much color. I like this. Ovini, you said the trends can't be seen at a glance. It's better if there was a graph. Brilliant. So the point of a table is to help you identify where things are going. Too much information again. Numbers are not separated. So how do you think you could make this clearer? Yes, a graph. Or even if you were to keep the table, what can we do with it? We can maybe highlight the key numbers. What is it that you want people to see from this? Is there a trend that you want to mark? Even keeping it in a table, you could mark upward or downward trend. Yes, exactly. You can highlight the main parts of it. By making the whole thing less colorful, then you can use strategic colors to make sure that the audience gets what you're going for, right? I saw the idea of using different colors for each one. That might be a little too much, because then you're getting at least, if you're talking about each column, you're getting at least 5 different columns, 5 different colors, which might be a little overwhelming. So think about your why, and think about what is it that you really need to communicate in this instance, right? Okay, so we've figured out that tables are not evil, but we can make them clearer, and we can use graphs. What else can we do when we're thinking about visuals? Let's take a look at the next slide. So this is a set of slides that one of my friends was presenting, and they're talking about innovation, right? Innovation versus tradition. Now, I'd like you to take a minute to think about, how would you visualize it? How would you turn this into a picture or a diagram? Okay, there's a good suggestion, but this is all text, right? And some of these points, like innovation and tradition being counterintuitive, can be turned into a picture. So if you take a look at what we did at the end of it, right? Innovation and tradition are opposed to each other. To get that idea across in a diagram, Susan, if you could just click once, then we'll see the next one, right? That visual kind of communicates the idea that, okay, innovation, tradition, two separate things. Now, this presentation was also about thinking outside the box, and that innovation doesn't necessarily have to only be outside the box, but it can come from things that are in the box. So the next slide, what we did was we actually put a box in there, and we thought about the elements that go into it. So if you could click again, brilliant. So you can see that this becomes much more visual. Now, I'm not saying these are the perfect visuals, but it helps you picture it in your mind a lot more. So when you're faced with a presentation, think a little bit more about how you can help people visualize what you're talking about. So we're quickly going to go into a few do's and don'ts based on what we've been discussing and the brilliant points that you brought up as well. First of all, like I said, and I'm repeating this, see, remember your why. The second is to keep things cohesive. So when we looked at some of the slides, you said, okay, it's disorganized, it's all over the place. If you look at a presentation where one slide is one way and the other one is entirely different, you'll still get that feeling that, oh, I'm being jerked about, and there's no common theme running through this. So do make sure that you have a theme. Also do use visuals, because people can picture what you're talking about that much better. And you're going to be talking anyway, so helping you communicate with your pictures is a good way to get the idea across to people who have different preferences in the way they listen or learn. The final do that I've mentioned is do double check. So if you have spelling errors, if you have things out of alignment, it's going to throw people off and distract from your message. So please do double check. Some of the don'ts, don't overcrowd your slides. Again, things that you have mentioned in the comments, don't overcomplicate them. So my suggestion for this, and generally a recommendation, is have one idea per slide. Again, make it in alignment with your why, and make sure you have one main idea for each slide. You can break it down then, but make sure that you have no more than 6 lines of 6 words each. That's just a rule of thumb. You can break these rules. Nobody's going to fight you for it, but kind of keep in mind that the more you put on a slide, the less people are going to remember, because it's just like taking that gully of rice and stuffing it in their face, right? You want to make it bite-sized chunks. Also try not to clash, because again, that detracts from your message. And don't, please, whatever you do, don't read off your slide. Okay. Videos are an excellent way to do it as well. And you can definitely use any kind of visual aids. All right, now we've kind of prepared a material, we've got everything together. A few other things that you might want to prepare for the day are like, making sure you're familiar with whatever technology that you're using, test it out first. Sometimes it might let you down, and that's okay. All right, but it's always better when you're prepared. Then you put all of this into practice. Now, like I said, these are interchangeable. So you can do your planning, you can do your preparation, you can do your practice, which is the next step, and you can go back to planning it. That's completely fine, right? So let's go on to the practice steps. I've suggested a few different ways that you can practice, and I would love to have you practice some of these things right now, but since I won't be able to see you, I'm not going to ask you to. But these are things that you can use. So you can record yourself and play it back. When you're practicing, try to do it under a little stress. That might sound like, why am I trying to give myself more stress, right? But try it, because that way on the day, you'll be prepared for a stressful situation. Take notes when you can. Take notes on your performance, and also when you're using your notes, don't write everything down. Yes, that's a brilliant idea. Rehearse with your friends, your family. You can stop people on the way and say, try out your jokes on them or your lines on them and see if it works. Most of them are going to be very kind, so take their feedback with a pinch of salt. Ask them very specific questions, right? How does this make you feel? Did that provide enough information? Don't just ask them, was it good? Because the tendency is going to be for them to say, yeah, it's good. So try and think about what questions you want to ask them before that. Rehearsing in front of a mirror is also good. Why I suggest recording is because then you're not too focused on that, right? So then you can look back at it afterward and see how you felt. Do time yourself, because it's very easy to overrun time, especially on the day. So do it a couple of times. And while you're doing it, right, visualize success, or even before you do it. Take a minute to calm yourself down, empty your mind, and visualize what it will be like once you convince people, once they're all on your side, because that will help a lot with your nerves. And when it comes to your notes, try not to get tied to them, but do kind of internalize maybe the order, the structure that you're going in, and your main points. So even if the words you use are different to explain it, at least you know, okay, this comes first, this comes next, this comes after that. We won't be sharing the PowerPoint slides, but we will be sending you a handout. Interesting question. What happens when, however much you've rehearsed, you forget a word at that time? That's fine. If you've internalized it, right? If you know the order of your point, then you can turn things around. You can say whatever your point is a different way. This is the danger of trying to memorize it word for word, because then you're stuck. And if you skip the next word, then your brain is like, oh, I can't go past this point because I don't have that next word in line. So think about different ways you can say it, and think about the points rather than just those words. Okay, so say we've practiced. Now what do we do? Yeah, definitely keep notes but try and keep it out of sight of your audience, because it's not really great to be shuffling the notes all the time. And if you have it in front of your face like this isn't going to be fun, right? For the audience, they're not going to connect with you because you are not making eye contact with them. So do remember that while you have notes, you want to keep them, say, lower than your eye line. All right, so we've practiced. Now it's time for the performance. And these next pointers that I'm going to mention to you are also things that you can bring back into your practice, right? Just because I say it in the performance section doesn't mean when you're practicing, you ignore it. Okay, so one of the factors that counts in your performance is your voice, because people listen to what you're saying, right? And they also listen to how you're saying it, not just the content of what you're saying. So your pronunciation, I'll put that first because I want to get it out of the way. We get very, very worried about how we're pronouncing things, but what really happens, especially in English, is people are listening more to your emphasis than the pronunciation of individual words. So while it's great to pronounce things correctly so that it's not a distraction, right? What people are going to be paying more attention to is which words are you stressing? Which part of the word are you stressing? And that has a real impact. So if you've been wondering why, okay, some people are like totally pronouncing things wrong, but people are just sitting there and nodding to them. It's because they've got their point across by what they emphasize. The next thing you think about is how fast or slow you speak. Now, when you slow things down a bit, you sound more thoughtful. And that can be very, very useful. If you speed things up, you sound really excited and engaged and you bring the energy up, right? So pace can be important as well. Your pitch, whether you're speaking in a higher tone or a lower tone. Now, what we've found in research is that people tend to, for whatever reason, trust people more when they're using a lower tone, right? At a higher tone, you sound more questioning, curious, excited maybe. So depending on what you're trying to communicate, you can vary your pitch as well. Projection, the volume. If I shout, which I won't do that out of mercy for your ears because some of you may have headphones in, it will have a bigger impact, but it also may be too loud. So if you have someone like just in front of you, if you're talking to them one-on-one, right? You do not want to be this loud. You want to be at a conversational tone. But what happens if I'm whispering? Can you hear me? You probably couldn't hear that very clearly, and that didn't help either. But speaking softly can also be a way to get your attention. People lean forward in their seats. They pay more attention. They kind of try to see what you're saying because that's our instinct. So varying your pitch, varying your projection, your volume basically will help. But if you're in a big audience and if you're in a physical location, you want to make sure that the person at the end of the room can also hear you as clearly as the person in the back of the room. So you need to project a bit more. Remember, when you're using these, you still need to be natural. Okay? Don't be artificial because people generally sense that and they like it. So how do you make these things more natural? You practice and you stay true to yourself. Okay, so even if you are used to talking a certain way, you can always expand that range. But you don't have to necessarily shout to make yourself heard. If you are a soft-spoken person, you might try increasing your range, but you don't necessarily have to put on a whole other personality to get your message across. right? Think about other ways you can do it. You can vary your pitch, you can vary your tone, use a microphone, get all that technological help, because they are brilliant ways to make yourself heard. That's why we have that technology. Okay. And the other thing is pauses. Take a moment, let things sink in. And that actually gets people's attention. It makes sure that they have time to process what you've been saying. And it can make you sound much more authoritative. So I've got some great questions. I'll be responding to those as well at the end. Things like the tone that you use to, sound more convincing in a sales presentation. Try things out. So my suggestion for all of these, right, would be to kind of try them out at different times. Don't feel shy and think about it as like a social experiment. You're going there with the aim of trying it out. So even if people laugh at you, the joke's on them, because hey, you are learning from this and they're like your little guinea pigs, because they are helping you learn. So that's a good way to overcome your fear of trying out new things. Now, your voice isn't your only tool. There is body language, how you use the space around you, the gestures that you use, how you use your hands. So it's very different in an online presentation because you only have sort of this little box to move around in, but you can set things up so that you walk around more. In an in-person presentation, you have a whole stage that you can work with. So it's important to use the space around you and to kind of make your presence felt, but don't do it without a point, right? If you have no need for movement, don't move just because people say, okay, you have to use the whole space. If you jump up and down just for the sake of it, you're taking away for your presentation. So always go back to your why, your aim. Okay, think about, what do I want out of this? And then put your toolkit together. And we kind of get into a rut or a groove, and we get used to using the same tools over and over again. Don't let that be you. Change things around, try new things. If it doesn't work, fine. That's something that you can take away from your toolkit. If it does work, brilliant. You have another tool in your toolkit. So remember, use your voice, your gestures, your body language, all of that as a way of making a genuine connection and actually getting your point across. Be true to yourself. Now you'll be wondering why I didn't really talk about dress code so much. The reason is that I believe that you should be you, okay? So if there's a particular way you dress, then let that speak for yourself. Of course, you're going to try to be neat. You're again going to try to make sure that your dress doesn't take too much away from the presentation. But hey, if you're a big fan of big fluffy hats, go ahead and wear them. If your content is good enough, it's not going to matter that much. This is a bit controversial. People have different opinions on it. But my big believer in any presentation, my big belief is to be yourself. So business settings have changed quite a bit. They've become more casual, but this is where you think about your audience as well. Okay, if it's a less formal presentation, go ahead, do, be as extraordinary as you want. It doesn't matter. In a business setting, unfortunately, we still have certain, not exactly rules, but requirements in terms of the type of clothing you wear. And you might do that out of respect to your audience or out of not wanting them to be distracted from the point you're making. It's a personal choice, and you have to weigh the pros and cons of why you're doing it. So on that note, I'm going to suggest that for your homework, we don't really give homework, but for your homework, I would like to suggest that you go plan a presentation, and then when you're practicing, you try doing things that you have never done before. So if you haven't ever like talked really fast, if you usually talk really slow, try talking really fast. If you usually talk very, very softly, go ahead and try doing it loud, okay? So we're going to send you a handout at the end of this, and that does have activities to try out at each stage as well. So my call to action is for you to go ahead and try fishing using some of those activities. So let's go fish. And you'll notice we started off with that little hook, the theme, and we've come back to it at various stages throughout the presentation as well. So I'm reminding you to care and also always remember your purpose and to be you. Okay, do you have any questions?
Hi, Sharon. So we have, like, generally a lot of the questions were, why do we get nervous when we see a big crowd? Like, what do you do when you have stage fright? So that is like one of the main questions I saw.
And that's a great question, right? It's really important because that's one of the biggest things we struggle with. People say that, you know, they'd rather be dead than do a presentation. So what I would ask you to remember is that your fear or anxiety, okay, is a natural reaction. Ages ago, historically, when we were like living in caves and, you know, we hadn't evolved that much, us being alone meant that we wouldn't survive. So we all have this fear of rejection. And that's why we're so scared of exposing ourselves in that way. And that causes anxiety. And anxiety is a reaction in one of the oldest parts of your brain. So sitting there and trying to fight it and telling yourself, okay, I shouldn't be scared. I shouldn't be anxious. It's just a little thing is not going to work. Instead, communicate with your body, right? Listen to your body. Calming down is not what I mean. Sit still and breathe, right? When you breathe, there's a pattern. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, and breathe out for 4 seconds. That makes your body's automatic calming mechanism kick in. Another way that you can do it is to actually use those nerves, because what anxiety is doing first, right? You may have heard of the fight or flight or freeze reaction. It's actually preparing you to, in the case of an emergency, run away or fight or, you know, play dead, basically. So let your body get those nerves out of you. If you're having a flight reaction, go running around the room a little bit, jump up and down, just get those nerves out of you. That will help a lot in dealing with your anxiety. Another thing that really helps with anxiety is knowing that you're prepared and knowing that whatever you do, you have these notes, you have this plan to fall back in, and the drilling has kind of, all that practicing that you did so many times over has kind of given you that subconscious routine to go back to. I hope that answered your question, and I hope that helps you feel a little calmer when you're doing the next presentation. Power pose, brilliant suggestion as well. How do you sound confident? Well, taking a deep breath before you speak can help. If your voice isn't shaking, that's very useful.
Sharon, I think there's another question, but before we go into that, we will be sharing the feedback link as well, right? So while we're answering the questions, please be on the lookout to the chat box for the feedback link. Make sure that you go into this and you give us a feedback, because that is how we will be able to send you your handouts. So please make sure that you do that. Another interesting thing, Sharon, is when we were talking about this anxiety, is doesn't that actually help you to perform as well? You know, this flight or fight mechanism. It is, I mean, we all think of it as something negative, but what do you think? Doesn't it help you to perform as well?
I love that you brought that up, because that's so true, right? When it goes overboard is where you start having problems. But when you have just the right amount, it's giving your body all that energy, right? Of course, we're not running away from giant lions or anything these days, but it's giving you the energy to bring into your performance. So you can definitely use that, as Susan said. Thank you, Susan.
Another interesting question out there that I just noticed was, there's a person who's commented saying that, is there a limitation on the number of slides that could be included in a presentation? Will the number of slides affect a presentation? Like he or she says that he finds it to be boring if there's a lot of slides. Your comments on that?
Well, yes, it can. If you can kind of limit the number with every idea you have, right? Because you have to cut down at some point. Now, even for this, there were so many things I wanted to tell you, and I had to kind of sit down and say, okay, not today, maybe another day. So you have to do that with yourself as well. So when you're doing the slide, something to that benchmark of one idea per slide will help you decide how many slides you're going to put in the presentation.
Yeah, and also I think comes back to your important thing, why the presentation, right? So that would kind of give you a what do we say, an idea of what to include and how many slides to put through. Yeah, true.
Yeah. Susan, you're repeating it for me now. Now, I also saw another interesting question about, is it okay if we make stuff up to convince people? Please don't lie. Okay. You can make up stories, that's fine, as long as the people know they're fictional, but please don't lie.
And interesting, another one that comes up is, how do I sound confident? So quite a few people saying, I prepare for the presentation, I start speaking, I get nervous, and then the quiver in the voice and all of that. And how do I sound confident? Any tips on that, Sharon? How could a person sound confident?
One of the biggest things is practice, because practice creates those neural pathways in your brain so that the familiarity is there. This is something I've done before, okay? So it's not something unfamiliar, and it's unfamiliarity that kind of makes you feel that extra pressure. So practice is a big one. Another thing is the power pose that I saw in the comments. That's a very good one. You stand and put your hands on your hips. There are various different power poses that you can do that gets your body feeling more energetic, more present, and that can help you conquer the nerves, right? Things that we talked about for anxiety, like the breathing. Meditation is a good one. Anything that you find soothing, but really the more you do it, the more confident you get. Anything else?
And I also think, what you mentioned about internalizing, isn't it? Because there are a few questions that comes up about, I'm started a presentation, I forgot a word, I've got stuck, and how do I get out of it? So is it internalization there, Sharon, or anything else that you would add into it?
Yeah, definitely. Again, as I said, it comes down to that practice phase, being clear about your notes, being clear about your plan, and not relying on memorizing it word for word, but just kind of, as Susan said, internalizing the idea is a great way to go about it.
an interesting one for you and very apt for the time is during a Q&A session. If I come across a question which I don't know the answer, how do I handle it? What would you do, Sharon? What would you do at a point like this?
I would be honest about it. If we feel like we have to know everything and present ourselves as experts, but we're really human. So you might tell the person, okay, look, I'm not sure at this point in time, but I will look it up and tell you the answer. I'll get back to you. So leave me your contact details and I'll find an answer for you. But once you promise that, please do find that answer. Or what you can do is, if you have another person on the panel who you think nudge, nudge, wink, wink can help you out, go ahead and go, Susan, can you give me the answer, please? I'm not really sure about it.
Yeah, that's a very, I mean, I guess the most applicable thing would be to be honest, isn't it? Be honest and say, look, I need to look it up probably and get back to you on that. Yeah. Tara, is there any more questions for us? I see quite a few.
Yeah, about like how to improve your pronunciation when you're talking, like during a presentation, how do you maintain that tone? How do you show someone that you're serious? Like, what is the ideal tone?
So remember what I said about being yourself? That is very, very important. Don't try to put on a particular tone. I know people say fake it till you make it, but really I don't like that so much. You might emphasize parts of yourself, you might like project, but you're not going to fake it, right? At least I prefer to say you shouldn't fake it. But during that practice, when you try different things and you find, oh, something works on someone in particular, say, if using a very sweet tone convinces people, well, go ahead and use it. But be true to yourself in that process, I think, is one thing. So if you want to show people that you're serious, try things like lowering your pitch, try things like talking a little bit slower, or pausing a little bit more, especially after you've made a point. Those can convey seriousness, but try to do it in a way that's natural for you. And that, again, making that natural comes through practice and trying things out. How do you improve your pronunciation is a little too long of a topic to go into today. I don't know, Susan, if anything in the series is going to cover that.
We actually did. I think our first session was about fluency and pronunciation, but we are going to have another one on grammar. So probably we could touch a bit on pronunciation as well. We'll see how it goes. Another interesting one, Sharon, I don't know whether they're putting you on the spotlight or putting me on the spotlight there, but when you rely on technology, I mean, nowadays we depend on technology so much. And when something goes wrong, say you're doing a session like this and something goes wrong, how do you manage that? What do you do at that point?
I love how we've got real life examples, right? In this case, try and have a backup. So I've done this entire presentation on my phone because my first choice, my laptop kind of crashed at the beginning and I couldn't go back into it. So kind of whenever you're using technology, you know that Murphy's Law applies. So there's bound to be something that will go wrong. First of all, stay calm. Don't panic, okay? People understand that technology has problems, but wherever possible, keep a backup and a backup for your backup. So since I wasn't able to show the presentation, at least Susan could. So that helps a lot.
And also we had a few questions about how do we get an idea about the ideal kind of presentation? Like, are there any videos that we could watch to get that particular idea of how an ideal presentation goes? So do you have any recommendations?
So thank you. There's no such thing as an ideal presentation. I can't remember who said it, but quite a famous person actually said that there are 3 presentations for every presentation you give, right? One was the presentation that you had in your mind, first of all, the presentation that you prepared, and the third is the presentation that you actually give. And there's always a gap between those. So no presentation is perfect. And even if you look at someone and think, oh, wow, they did such an amazing job, it's bound to be fact that they felt that they could do better, and there'll be any number of flaws that they can pinpoint from their presentation. But that said, there are videos, TED Talks are brilliant for this. You can go on YouTube and check out the resources. Just take a look at presenters, whoever makes you feel something or makes you think about something. They are a good presenter, right? Any presenter will have their flaws, but take the good things out of it. If you enjoy it, if they entertain you, inform you, or make you want to act on it and make you feel something, then they are good. So take cues from them.
Right. So I think, we need to go into the questions now, Sharon. So I'm sure that they enjoyed it, and there were quite a few very kind words. Sharon, if you will share it with you as well, I guess, quite a few compliments as well. So thank you so much. I'm sure it was a session that I picked up a lot from. So I was sharing the slides. It was, something that there was something to learn from it. And I think, like you said, give it your best shot and be true to yourself. And most importantly, why? Know why you're doing it, know your audience. So I'm repeating what Sharon said over here. So thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you for spending time with us. And thank you to all of the lovely folks who joined us today. But please remember, we have a little link for you, which will lead you to the questions. The link, the form will be active until 8:30. So make sure that you give us your answers and send it, submit one. There are a couple of, sometimes people tend to send in multiple submissions. Please make sure to submit one, and we will follow back with the handout for you. And also those who are asking us about the certificates, remember, when you join these webinars, if you have come for 7 webinars, you will be eligible for the certificate. So I see the link on the chat box. Please check it out, see whether it works. And thank you very much. Once again, thank you, Sharon, for your time and for the lovely presentation.
Thank you, Susan. If I can add to that, guys, please do fill in the feedback, because it helps me to improve on my presentation for the next time and make it more effective. So please do that for me, and go fish. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. I do hope everyone has got the link. It's on the chat box. So we'll be sharing it once more. Yes, so please go and give us your feedback. And also the link that we're sharing now is for the questions for today's workshop. Thank you very much. And remember, next week we have another interesting program. So keep in touch with us and we will let you know about next week's webinar. Right? So stay safe, everyone.